Kairete Pontes, welcome back to Greek. This week we are focusing on second declension masculine nouns, and we'll be learning the masculine definite article, and then we'll just be going through some more vocab, and our teaser at the very end will be a sentence with a neuter noun in it and our very first adjective. So we're starting to pick up the pace. These videos will probably be a little bit shorter in general. So for example, this one gonna be pretty brief, so let's just get into it. Okay, the second declension masculine endings are probably easier to remember than first declension, honestly, once you get the hang of it. So the nominative is omicron sigma, so os, and again we're using this sigma rather than this one because that sigma is the last letter in the ending, so it's the last letter on whatever noun we're using. And then genitive is oo, omicron, upsilon, then o, omega, and this has an iota subscript, just like our alpha or eta that we saw earlier. Okay, and then accusative is omicron nu. So our singular is os, u, o, on. And then in the plural, we have omicron iota, so oi, then omega nu, own, and then omicron iota sigma, ois, and omicron upsilon sigma, us. So let's just say them all. Os, u, o, on, oi, own, ois, us. This is relatively straightforward, especially if you think about how os would make sense to be masculine, since us in Latin, us, is masculine, right? So that can help you remember. The only thing that I would caution you to be careful with is that os is nominative, not genitive. I know this can be confusing because in feminine first declension we had ace or os, and those were genitive, not nominative. So make sure you understand that os is nominative, oo is genitive. Other than that, though, I think it's relatively straightforward, especially once we learn the article, which we'll be doing very soon. And then with vocative, it's a little bit more complicated than first declension, but not much. So we have the vocative singular ending in epsilon, so e, and this is just like in Latin too, that us ending becomes an e, and in Greek, this os ending, omicron sigma, becomes an e, epsilon. So not too bad again if you make these parallels between Greek and Latin. And then in the plural, it's even easier. It's just the nominative plural ending, which we just learned was oi up here. So that is following the same vocative rule we learned for first declension, where you just take the nominative forms and those are your vocatives. With second declension, the only difference is that in the singular, you're using e instead of the nominative. Okay, so really quickly, let's run through these endings one more time, starting with nominative singular. Os, u, o, with an iota subscript, on, and in the plural, oi, own, ois, us. And then your vocative is e in the singular, and oi, just like the nominative, in the plural. Okay, so hopefully these endings are starting to click, because when we learn the definite article, it's way easier if you already have a bit of a handle on the endings. So, the definite article for masculine begins with ha, which is just an omicron with rough breathing. And remember that although now with nouns we're just going to ignore accents, at least for now, with articles, prepositions, adverbs, verbs, everything else, besides nouns and adjectives, we still do care about the accents. And breathing marks we care about everywhere. So we have ha in the nominative, then tu in the genitive, so tau, omicron, upsilon, and this upsilon has a circumflex over it. Then in the dative, to, which is tau omega with an iota subscript, and then in the accusative, ton. And this has an acute, which flips and becomes a grave once you add a word after it. And because, remember, this is an article, we're going to have a word of some sort following this article. So we can just write it as a grave already. I'm fine with that. Okay, and then in the plural, we have hoi, which is omicron iota, and this has rough breathing. Remember, because this is a proper diphthong, we're going to put the breathing mark on the second vowel in the diphthong. And then genitive plural is tone, so tau omega nu, with a circumflex over the omega. And then, oh, I just realized one thing I forgot. Sorry. Go back to dative singular. There's also a circumflex over the omega. So there's both an iota subscript and a circumflex. That was my bad. Okay, now on to dative plural. We have tois, which is tau, omicron, iota, sigma, and a circumflex over the iota. And the reason I remembered that I had messed up here was because we learned, right, when we were learning accents, that the genitive and dative are going to have these circumflexes. So we know that the tu here has got to have the circumflex, the tone here has got to have the circumflex, to and tois, same thing. It's just the easiest way, I think, to remember that the circumflexes, when you're looking at your articles, are going to go on the genitive and dative. Okay, and then accusative plural is tous, which is tau, omicron, upsilon, sigma. And again, here we have an acute. When there's a word after it, it flips to become a grave, so I'm okay with flipping it now to become a grave. And that is it. That is the masculine definite article. And remember that we don't have a vocative anywhere, right? Because in the vocative, we use O, omega with smooth breathing and a circumflex, but that is not technically an article, so we don't include it here. And the reason I was saying that the masculine definite article is easier to learn once you have a basic understanding of the masculine noun endings is because you'll start to see so many overlaps. So yes, ha is different, but after that, the masculine ending, right, for in general is u. We just learned that. And so the article is just different because you're adding that tau. And of course we care about accents with the article, but you'll start to notice that the pattern continues. So u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. Those are all the masculine noun endings, right? For second declension. So if you can just remember those endings and remember that there's that ha as the beginning of the masculine definite article, you already know the definite article based on knowing the masculine second declension noun endings. All you have to do is add taus before every ending except your nominatives and add your accents. I think that can help when you're practicing and trying to learn these for the first time. So let's do some practice. The first set of practice we're going to do is with ha hippos. And hippos is no, not a hippo, unfortunately, but hippo does come from it, and hippos means horse. And hippos is especially interesting because actually it's either masculine or feminine. So you can have ha hippos or hey hippos, and ha hippos would be a horse, whereas hey hippos would be a mare. But as long as you really understand that hippos as a creature is a horse, it's really fine if you don't remember like which means which. Just understand that it can be either masculine or feminine, and we'll find this a lot with different animals and like human beings and gods and whatnot. So we'll see that in our vocab list today, actually. So let's decline it. Nominative singular, we have ha hippos, then tu hippu, then to hippo, and ton hippon. So you can see how similar the endings for the article or the endings for the noun are to the article, right? It sounds the same. When we're saying it out loud, it sounds like you have essentially the same endings, even when they're slightly different. Okay, then in the plural, we have hoi, hippoi, then tone, hippone, tois, hippois, and tus, hippus. And that is it. That is ha hippos declined, except for vocative, which we'll do really quickly. Remember, there's no article, but we can use o. So we're just going to write the noun. So hip, right? That's our stem. And then we're going to add rather than just using the nominative. And remember your rough breathing mark. And then in the plural, it is just the nominative form. That's vocative too. So hippoi. Relatively straightforward, right? Once you get the hang of it, once you start practicing going through. And as usual, there will be lots more practice in the worksheet down below. So make sure to check that out after watching this lesson video. And now let's move to our second example. So this one I picked because I love that the endings don't match, because that makes it a little bit trickier. So hados is a road or journey, and what's interesting is that although it has this second declension endings as if it would be masculine, it's actually feminine, and we can tell that by our feminine definite article. And this is where we're starting to see the value in using these articles and why they matter and why we need to understand how they're used and what they can do to help us out. So the nominative singular is just he hados. Then genitive singular. So the genitive singular article, feminine article, is tes, right? We learned that. And then for the masculine second declension ending is u, right? So tes hadu. And then we have te hado and tain hadon. So you see it doesn't match exactly, which is why I was reacting to ha hippos as a relatively easy match for your first try, because those endings are so similar, if not the same, a lot of the time. But here it's just more fun in my opinion. Okay, and then in the plural, nominative plural, we have hi as our article, and then hadoi, then tone, hadon. And this is where we can really see how consistent this genitive ending is with the omega nu. Regardless of masculine or feminine or first or second declension, whatever, we see that ending everywhere. Okay, then dative plural is tais, hadois, and then accusative plural, tas, hadus. Pretty interesting, right? So we're going to do vocative and then we'll say all of these again, this whole set with he hodos, just to get a feel for how the Greek would sound and how these endings really fit together when they don't necessarily match. Okay, so for vocative, we're not paying attention to the article anymore, and we're just looking at hodos, which is still second declension, regardless of hodos being feminine. So we're going to use the same rules. We take the stem, hod, and we add e. But in the plural, even simpler, we're just taking the nominative plural and using the same ending, and then we have vocative. So, hodoi. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing music notes. Okay, hodoi. Okay, so let's go through and say he hodos declined fully one more time. Starting with nominative singular. He hodos, tes hodu, te hodo, tain hodon, hi hodoi, ton hodon, tais hodois, and tas hodus. And then in the vocative, o, relatively optional, hode, and hodoi. So that's all the practice we're doing in the lesson. But again, down below, worksheet, which will have a few more examples that you can work through declining. And I've put in charts for you to fill them in. Okay, let's move to vocab. We only have one new verb this week, which is kairo. And so you probably might remember, because I say this at the beginning of every lesson, is kairete. And that's because kairete is from Cairo. And Cairo means to be happy, or with a dative, to rejoice in. But in the imperative, Cairo can mean hello. Just like salvete or salve in Latin, where technically it wouldn't necessarily mean hello in any other form, but because we're using kaire or kairete, that is an imperative form, and so we can use the hello definition for Cairo, rather than be happy or rejoice in or take delight in or anything like that. But when Cairo is not in the imperative, we're going to use be happy unless there is a dative noun somewhere in the sentence that's related to Cairo, and then it can mean rejoice in. So we'll see examples of that in sentences later on. Also remember that from now on we're using the future of the first person singular indicative form as our second principal part. So now let's move on to nouns, which are the most interesting part of this week, I think. Okay, first we have adelphe, adelphes, he, which means sister. And then we have the corresponding masculine, which is adelphos, ha, which means brother. And remember that this second ending, I guess, that's included in the dictionary entry is genitive, just like Latin. Okay, so then we have anthropos, and this can be ha or he, so it can be either masculine or feminine, depending on how it's being used in a sentence. So in general, it means human, but in masculine, it technically means man or mankind, and as feminine, it means woman or womankind. And again, we're going to determine whether this is being used as masculine or feminine based on the article that appears with it in whatever sentence we're doing. Okay, so the next word is theos, which is also second declension, so it has that genitive singular, and theos can also be masculine or feminine, so we write both the masculine and feminine definite article. Theos is a god or goddess when feminine, and in the vocative, theos is interesting because it can either stay as theos, so breaking the rule that we just learned about how the vocative singular is not the same as the nominative singular all the time, but it can be for theos, or the. So that follows the rule that we've learned. It just looks a little bit funky because you've got two epsilons right next to each other, but that is correct. So in vocative singular, you can have theos or the, and in the plural, we just follow the normal rules. So it's theoi. Just the normal endings. Okay, next we have lithos, ha, which means stone. Then lupe, ace, he, which means pain or grief. And then hados, which we just used, he. And this is way, path, road, or journey, all of the above. However, it makes most sense in this sentence. Okay, then we have patamos, ha, which means river. And so hippopotamus is river horse, which is, I was going to go into it earlier, but I didn't want to get too confusing. So when we were doing hippos, which means horse, and you combine it with patamos, which means river, then you get river horse, and that's essentially the role of a hippopotamus in our world. I don't know how else to better explain that, but I think that's a fun one. Okay, then our last noun is kara, or kara, as, he, which means joy or delight. And you might notice that this looks a little bit like Cairo, and that's because they are related. So Cairo is to rejoice in or be happy. Kara is the noun form, and it means joy or delight. Okay, and then we just have one preposition, which is apa. And apa means away from, takes the genitive, and it can either appear in addition to apa as up or off. And so op would be used before a noun that has a vowel beginning it, or off can be used before a noun that has a vowel beginning it, but the difference between the two is that op would appear where there's smooth breathing beginning the next word, and off would appear where there's rough breathing. So apa, where there's a noun or word following it that begins with a consonant, so including a definite article, and then op or off when the following word begins with a vowel, op when that vowel has smooth breathing, and off when it has rough breathing. Okay, so now it's teaser time, and this is another wonderful sentence, if I do say so myself, and it includes a neuter noun, an adjective, and a future. I think that's a pretty great combination of everything that we are either about to learn or just learned a week ago. So first, let's start with our subject. It's okay if you can't recognize the subject right now because it's all new. So ta, kalon, teknon is actually our subject. And so you might be thinking, well, didn't we just learn that on ending is accusative singular, right, for second declension masculine nouns? Well, yeah, but teknon is neuter. So the way that you can tell this, if you ever get lost and think that something is masculine because of a similar ending, you can look at the article. So there's no nu on the end of the ta, right, that article here. And so that's how we can tell, if you didn't know the words, that this noun is neuter. So then what's this? Kalon, that is an adjective. So a lot of times the adjectives will match the nouns in their endings, but not necessarily, just like the article. it won't necessarily match endings. That doesn't mean that they're different genders. It just means that they're different declensions or different endings. Okay, so ta is the neuter article in the nominative. Kalon, like we just said, is an adjective, and kalon means beautiful or fair or handsome, anything like that. And teknon is a child, so the beautiful child. Then let's look for our verb. Now we look through the rest of the sentence, and where do we see a verb ending? Right at the very end. So here we have pempse, and so we learned the word pempo, right? Pempo means to send. But then where did this psi come from out of the blue? So psi is what happens when you combine p with sigma, right? And that happens when we are making a verb future. So this is pempe written in the future. So we know pempe, that a ending is the third person singular, present active, indicative with pempo. And so when we make pempe future, this is just a quick little future refresher. So we always add the sigma, and when sigma combines with p, we replace both letters with a psi. And your accent still follows the same rules we learned in lesson 2. So that's all with that verb. We figured out that it's third person singular, future active, indicative of pempo, which means to send. So now here we are. We're at ta kalon teknon, the beautiful child, pempse, will send, tain epistolane. So now we're back in first declension, doing things we learned a couple lessons ago. And we know that tain is the feminine definite article. And epistolane is just like epistula in Latin. It just means a letter. So let's put it all together and then we'll wrap up. So ta kalon teknon, pempse, tain epistolane, the beautiful child will send the letter. And that's it. You just learned your first neuter noun and adjective, and had a little future review, and had a little first declension review. So I hope that you're excited to learn neuter nouns and adjectives next week, and there's a lot to go over with adjectives. It's really exciting, really fun. I hope you're all having a good time. Make sure to reach out if you have any questions. Contact information is down below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.